we read in Genesis that he had, over 300 men he had trained in his household. Men love to do this. They love to train and build and set vision and understand, like, how are we leading this team forward? But because we don't put family at all in that category, family, that could be almost, there's nothing more different than family than team. We have to go out and find that elsewhere. We got to find that in sports. We got to find that in work. We got to find that someplace else. And so most men are abandoning their team, joining other teams, and they don't realize that they have a wife and children who are sitting at home waiting for the coach to show up and start to lead them, because we've never said that.
You are listening to the Famous at Home podcast with Dr. Josh and Christy Straub.
Because when it's all said and done, we all want to know that we were famous at home. Welcome back to the Famous at Home podcast. Today we have dear friends Jeremy and April Pryor joining us for this conversation. We actually just came back from their home, spending time with them, and we get to invite you into some of this conversation. Before we jump in, here is a word from our sponsors. Hey everybody, Josh Straub here with Famous at Home. We want to introduce you to the Famous at Home Starter Bundle. This is something we created just for you. All you have to do is click the button to sign up to receive our workbook, 7 decisions to putting your family center stage. You'll also get a feelings chart handout that you can implement with your kids and with your spouse. And you'll also receive the 100 commonly held values worksheet so that you can sit down with your family and discuss the values that you want to set as a family that will provide vision for how and you want to lead your family in the direction that you're going to head in. So you get those 3 things right away as soon as you sign up. In addition to that, we will send to you our top podcast episodes on marriage, parenting, and family, the most listened to and the most foundational for developing emotional connection with your loved ones. You'll also receive past newsletters, our exclusive weekly newsletter. You'll be enrolled to receive that on an ongoing basis. These are real-time newsletters of what's happening in our lives and what we're doing and implementing to be famous at home that we want to give to you, just weekly nuggets to keep us equipped every single week. And then you'll also receive the weekly podcast episodes as well. This starter bundle is all free. We want to give it to you. Just click the link to sign up. Welcome back to the Famous at Home podcast. Today we have dear friends on the podcast. This is one of those that I have been so excited about bringing to you, our podcast family, to bring you into the lives of Jeremy and April Pryor, because they have just been an absolute godsend for our family. And today it is me interviewing them. Unfortunately, it wasn't Christy joining me because we were on the way home from their house yesterday and Christy started feeling ill. And so we're really bummed that she could not join us for this episode, but she was just we were just there as a family at the Pryor's house this past weekend. And we went there because we are in this season of looking at the families around us who we see living it well, doing it well. They've raised their kids well. And we're going, what did you do? What is your philosophy for raising your families the way that you are? And this little mini series that we're doing the next 2 weeks with Team Pryor this week, we got Mark and Tina Sego coming next week. These families are people in our circles that have done this well, and we just wanted to get insight into their world. And so Jeremy and April graciously invited us up to be a part, to enter into their world, their rhythms that they have as a family. And we did that this past weekend. And so we were there I got to experience Friday night Shabbat. We got to experience Friday night Shabbat with the family. I got to go to Saturday. They do a midrash as men in the community, which was just a really cool experience for me, where there's a reading of the scriptures, and then everybody sits down and just does a debate and just talks about the scripture that was read. And then Sunday night, they had church at their house. They have house church that they host, and we got to just jump in, be a part of that. And it was just beautiful ebb and flow of being in their home, but not feeling this. I mean, it was hospitable. It wasn't pressured. We didn't feel like they were trying to cater to us all the time, which felt just lovely. But yet we were present. We enjoyed it. And there's just something about the way that they lead, the way that they establish the atmosphere of their home. And they've been doing this for a long time. And so I wanted to invite you into some of the conversations that we had this past weekend, some of the rhythms that they have. You've heard me talk about this because I've been part of Integrated, which is the mastermind group of family teams. Jeremy and April lead a ministry called Family Teams, and we'll put their books, their podcasts, and everything in the show notes today. But I wanted to invite you into some of the conversations that Christy and I had with them this past weekend, because they freed us up. They have helped us in making different decisions that we are about our family, that we're currently praying through and making with our family. And there's such a paradigm shift here. And I want to set the tone for that right now. There is a paradigm shift that and I encourage you to listen to this with your spouse. Listen to it together, because there's such a paradigm shift here, and something that is just really important, I think, for you to grab a hold of, that is a mindset shift before you grab the tools. So don't try to grab the tools before you understand the mindset shift that takes place here. And this is a mindset shift that has taken place for us for a period of time. So I would just encourage you to read, get into some podcasts. If this resonates with you, get into some of their podcasts, get into their book, get into some of what they're talking about and the way that they're living their lives. And reach out to us, because we would love to answer any questions that you have about the way that we've done family as a result of this. And so without further ado, I want to introduce you to our interview with Jeremy and April Pryor. Jeremy and April Pryor, thank you so much for joining us today. We are just coming off, as I mentioned in the introduction, we're just coming off after having spent a weekend with you guys. So you guys graciously opened up your home to us. And so it was such a joy. And now it's a joy for me to be able to bring our podcast family a little bit into your living room to hear a little bit about what we talked about, what we're learning from you guys. And so I'd love for you guys to start by just introducing yourselves, your family, your kids, and just kind of your world. Introduce us to your world.
Thanks for having us today, Josh.
Yeah, absolutely. And
here.
Yeah, it's an honor to have you guys.
Okay, so we're Jeremy and April Pryor, and we live in Fort Thomas, Kentucky, which is just about 3 or 4 miles south of Cincinnati, Ohio. And we have been married 25 years. We just had our 25th anniversary, and so exciting.
I love
it. We have 5 kids and 1 grandson. We just had our first grandbaby.
And we got to meet the grandbaby this weekend. It's so fun. Congratulations, you guys.
Thank you so much.
Yeah. It's so fun. It's fun because we were talking this weekend, like, you guys are not that much older than we are, but yet you're in a different season of life, which is really cool because you guys got married younger. And so for those listening to the audio version of this, you get to hear from people who just have so much wisdom, but the season of life that you guys are in is ahead of us. And we just look up to you guys so much. And so I'm excited that everybody gets to hear from you in the season of life that you are in and celebrate alongside of you, because I think the seeds that you guys have planted, you're seeing the fruit of that.
Awesome. Yeah, we have, we only have 1 grandson and 1 child married. So that's as far as we can go with our experience. But our oldest is 23, and she just got married in April of 22. And then on their first wedding anniversary, brought home the baby from the hospital in April of 23. So, and we have 1 son, and he is 22. And then we have 3 more daughters, and they are 19, 17, and 14.
Amazing. Yeah. 19, 17, and 14. And so we got to see how you guys are managing all the adult children and the teenage children this weekend, which was so fun to be able to watch the way that you guys are so intentional. And, I think as I'm thinking of this, typically my frame before I met you, Jeremy, and before I had joined Integrated and Family Teams, my framework for this would be, be a good dad by just making sure I spend time with my kids. And I'll be a good dad by making sure that, but there's an intentionality that's different in terms of the way you guys are leading your teenagers. And I would love for you to take us back. Where did this intentionality come from? Where did this framework come from? And where did God lay this on your heart? Because it's a paradigm shift for so many of us.
Yeah, I would say, I know for me, it really, so I grew up in the Seattle area, and so that's really important, I think, for understanding, I guess, how dramatic the shift was for me. And I grew up in a really strong family. We had a good Christian community where there were other strong families, but I would say culturally, my experience was that family was, really sort of an experiment that had gone totally off the rails, right? So I was in sort of public school youth ministry in the Seattle area, and it was very rare to see somebody who came from an intact family where there was a mom and a dad, and they were really had a functional family raising their children in a healthy environment. That was the very rare exception, and so I had just taken that in and lost a lot of interest and hope for family. I was very excited about ministry, very excited about Jesus and following him and being a radical disciple, but I just I didn't really know how family fit into that. And so I was 23, and I was going to Israel for a semester abroad. I was into the Old Testament, wanted to start my studies over there. And I just kept encountering this bizarre thing, which was like fathers and children. It was everywhere I looked, there was these dads who seemed really intentional and also just really into the idea of being a father. And that was it was so stark to see an entire culture of family that way. And it kind of culminated for me one day when I just saw a group of dads pushing strollers with little kids in tow, and began to ask, like, what is going on there? I've never seen like the daddy brigade, like why are these men having lots of kids? Why are they into having children? Is it just that they haven't, realized what all the rest of us have realized, and that is, kids and men don't really mix very well. And so I was trying to figure out what was going on there. And I, was trying to understand how their culture differed. And when I started asking that question, the consistent response I got was either the Bible or Abraham. And I'm a Christian. I'm actually here in Israel to study the Bible, and I don't have the same ideas about family that these Jewish and even some of the Arab fathers had in the Middle East that I was encountering. And so I began to kind of burrow in at that time to say, okay, what does the Bible say about family? Is there something we've missed somehow in the church? And that's kind of where it just all started for us.
And so what did that look like for you to translate what you were learning there into your own family? And when did you capture this? When did this like take root for you, and in what way?
Yeah, I kind of unpacked it slowly over the course of, so I met April in Israel. And so we started a family, and I kept kind of realizing that.
Hold on a second. So tell us a little bit about that first. You met April in Israel, and we started a family. So it's just
I know that was a little like, woo.
I heard this fathers and Abraham, and I saw this, beautiful woman, and I thought, hey, do you want to start a family with me? Like, let's, what did this look like? Yeah.
We did get married first, and then started a family. Yeah.
Yeah.
Few details. Yeah. So what we were both doing was a semester abroad at Jerusalem University College. And he had a job as a youth pastor back home in Seattle. And I was heading back to Ohio. That's where I'm from, for a job. And so God had other plans, introduced us to each other. We fell in love. And within that semester, and so we came back to the States, and Jeremy came to Ohio for a visit, and had to kind of duke it out with my dad, which I was very in favor of. When we were in Israel, I was like, just in case you get any ideas, you cannot talk to me about anything long-term until you've spoken to my father. Oh, and man. He was like, what? How old are you again? And he hadn't quite caught on to that part of the vision yet. And so I come from a much different background than Jeremy culturally. I'm from the Midwest. And so it's very, I came from lots of multi-generational thinking, and there was a lot of entrepreneurship in my family. And so a lot of the things that he was discovering for the first time were kind of just part of my fabric, kind of my being. And so as he was discovering them, things like, yes, you need to ask my dad first, kind of a thing. Then he was like very willing, but just everything was so new to him. And so as he started to understand these things, it came across in ways like that. And then how he proposed to me, and I said yes. And we got married pretty quick. We had, I think, like a 13-week engagement. And 6 months into our marriage, we found out we were pregnant with our first child. So God's just seemed to have us on the fast track from kind of the beginning. So that's kind of how that's worked. But I feel like a lot of the first couple years were just us learning how to be married, how to be one, how to be on the same page about stuff. God had shown us so much in our semester abroad, and getting to implement that into our newlywed life was just fascinating. And becoming parents right away was such a like maturing, growing experience, and getting to do that together. And, in the context of a lifelong covenant, and all this thing was just so much growth was happening. And so I think some of what Jeremy's talking about was just very subtle at the beginning. And then as we kept adding to our nest, our next one came 15 months later, and on and on. And so as we were adding to our little, collection of children, Jeremy started to kind of be like, oh, we have to be a little more intentional about this stuff. They need training. They're asking questions. And so he started, maybe when our oldest was like 5 or 6, he started kind of reaching back and being like, okay, these things that we saw in Israel were huge. They were real. These questions I was asking, and they've been like slowly like germinating. In the beginning of our marriage, beginning of our parenthood, they started kind of coming out around, I would say, when our oldest was about 5 or 6 is when we started practicing Shabbat.
Right. Yeah. It was a long journey there of trying to figure out. I know for me, I'm kind of, I guess, wired to really want to operate from first principles. Like I just want to know the why. And I have very little energy for following something when the answer is we've always done it this way, or, just get with the program. So I was looking for a real foundation from which to build a family. And, we're lucky as believers to have the scriptures, because that's the whole point. God knew there were some things that needed to be revealed to us. You're not just going to discover them through sort of nature or something, and through maybe human reasoning. So I began to ask, does the Bible give us a blueprint for family? When God created this, what was he thinking? And so it's very overt. And it's sort of shocking to me how unknown it is. I would say, in my experience, like 99% of Western Christians are building their family according to a secular blueprint, essentially. Like they've been handed that blueprint. And so it sort of looks like, form a normal nuclear family, husband, wife, children. And you sort of hit the reset button every generation. Your goal is to create maximally independent children. The most sort of common or understandable metaphor for this kind of secular blueprint is the nest. And so you're attempting to sort of nurture. It's a very nurturing and it's primarily maternal kind of image of family building. And then you launch them out. And most families that think this way, they don't know who their great grandparents are. It's not relevant. Like, why would I need to know that? They don't know much about their history. Their identity isn't really rooted in their family line. And so all of those things are, that's sort of the water we swim in, not just in the secular culture, but in the church. That's how we think, that's what we think family is. And anyway, as I was burrowing into first principles and trying to study what the Bible says about this and how it seemed like God designed it, it's radically different than that.
Yeah.
Like the definition of family you get in scripture is not like that at all. And so, and I was seeing in the Middle East really an example of a kind of family that is much closer to the biblical blueprint than I had encountered in the church in the West.
And just, we're not going to be able to touch on every aspect of this. I mean, I've been journeying with Jeremy now for 4 years, and, and spending time with him. And so I want to point you guys all to the Family Teams podcast. I want to point you to his book called Family Revision: How Ancient Wisdom Can Heal the Modern Family. We'll put all of these in the show notes. Would love for you to get your hands on these. But as you've been listening to us through the years at Famous at Home, you hear us talk about Shabbat. You hear us talk about these rhythms that we're living by. Jeremy is the reason that we are doing. I mean, God's the reason, but he's using Jeremy and April. It's through him, through the mastermind group that I'm a part of, that they have through family teams called Integrated. This is why we're living these things out, and why we're asking the questions that we are. And so I just want to make sure that you go to the show notes, that you follow. If this is resonating with you in any way, want to make sure that you take a look at that. We're going to take a quick break. Here's a word from our sponsors. And when we come back, I'm going to ask some more specific questions to get into the practical of some of this. So we'll be right back. Hey everybody, Josh Straub here with Famous at Home. I want to introduce you to something if you haven't already seen it. This is our new book, Famous at Home, 7 Decisions to Putting Your Family Center Stage in a World Competing for Your Time, Attention, and Identity. When a couple or a family comes to us and says, hey, Josh, we have a question. What do we do next? We always point to this book. This is our coaching playbook. This is the play-by-play strategies that we use to help families to be famous at home. And so if you have not picked up this book yet, we highly encourage you to get a copy. You can see a link in the show notes. You can click a link right here in the video, and we would love for you to be able to get a copy of this in your hands. If you want to go deeper than the podcast episodes, this is the way to do that. It's our way of walking alongside your family to help you be famous at home. Okay, so I would love for you to describe, because even as I'm out and about, so I think I'm trying to, let me put all this into one primary question here, because I'm going into a billion questions and I want to ask them all at the same time. So let me just get very specific. This way of living, you mentioned 99.9. I typically say the 98%. It's kind of like there's like 98% of us are just living a life that often we don't even think about. We just do it because it's what we're supposed to do. And I would love for you, when I start putting language to this with other people, I just spoke to a mutual friend of ours, who he's now catching this concept, and we were talking about it. He's like, I didn't have an understanding of it the way that you do. And now I can talk to him. We have the same language, but there's a lot of this language that we like, even Shabbat, right? Like this, I'll talk about Shabbat, and there's so many people who are saying, well, I don't know what that is. Can you describe for us where you started? Like, if for a family who's being introduced to this paradigm shift for the very first time and just trying to make this practical, where did your family start for the first time? And what would you encourage families to start wading into as they start thinking about this?
Yeah, I would say that it's probably important to say that there's a certain mindset shift, and then there's tools. So, so the mindset shift is, what is the family? And so the sort of the typical secular, even Christian Western idea of family is a springboard for individual success. Like you've said to yourself, I have raised a good family when, all the chickies are launched and they're thriving in their individual lives. Okay. So that is the sort of the definition of sort of the way we think about what a family is. So there's a completely different kind of family that I see in the scriptures, which is we kind of described as a multi-generational team on mission. So it is, you didn't start this thing. You're a part of a family line. You are birthing children and grandchildren into an identity as a family. So it's a multi-generational family. It's a team. In other words, God designed you to work together, not as just individuals where you come back together to kind of like catch up and then everybody rushes off into their own lives. You are stewarding a team. That's probably the most like understandable way of understanding it. And then it has a purpose. Like in this, your family line and your team is designed to do a mission, or missions in the kingdom. And so basically, I mean, you can see this all the way back in Genesis 1. The first family we have is described as a multi-generational team on a mission. God had an issue. He wanted to expand the boundaries of the Garden of Eden. He creates a family, male and female. He created them, and then he gave them a mission that could only be fulfilled as a team generationally, right? Be fruitful, multiply, fill the earth, subdue it, rule. You're not going to subdue the earth with just Adam, Eve, and Seth, right? It's going to
Yeah.
take a multi-generational family to do the things that God is describing. And he expected them to do it together and then to ultimately rule. That's a different kind of family. So multi-generational team on a mission is not the same. So, but the problem is once you make this shift and you open your toolbox, it's often empty, right? If you open the toolbox for how to create the nest for individual success, we have hundreds of tools for that in our culture. You know, every sports team that we have, every Christian ministry is designed to sort of atomize the family into its smaller components, and then to train those individuals in ways that they can help them flourish or learn important things. But how many places do you go where it's like, okay, we need your family to stay together. It's going to be ideally work if you do it with your kids, with your spouse, maybe even multi-generationally. Where do you go to build up the kind of family that is described in the Bible? And so we, a lot of times what we do is we do start people with the idea of what about a family meal? And we saw this in the Middle East. And when we say that to most Western people, the first response I almost always get from people is, oh, we do that. We have, weekday family meals where we force our kids to like eat together. We all catch up before we blast off into our individual, like, no. That's not what we're talking about. Okay. We're not talking about the sort of typical, weekday catch-up meal,
which is still a great thing.
Yeah, totally good.
Yeah.
Like we need to do those things. But what we're talking about is something, it's crazy in the Middle East, what you see on Shabbat, like in Jerusalem in particular, when, on Friday, where all of a sudden you see everyone's like rushing to their family, even their people in their 20s and 30s are all headed to their parents' house. The closest thing we have in our culture to this idea is Thanksgiving, right? Where you have all day just to hang out with your family. Now, most people absolutely dread that experience because they're so out of practice that it's sort of like, who are these people? We all have different views. We've never like synced up on anything. I haven't seen you in a year, and so there's a lot of awkwardness around that. And it's like a lot of people, some people have good experiences of that, but other people just sort of bear with it. And then that's like, okay, well, we'll check in next year. But imagine if you were raised in a family that did this every single week, and it was incredibly life-giving to you and your family. And at this family meal, you would share family stories, and you would begin to see and experience like who you are as a family. And that at the family table, everyone, you were playing your role. Fathers are fathers, mothers are mothers, sons are sons, daughters are daughters. Like we express and experience and celebrate all of those, the incredible identity that each of us has within this thing called the family, including matriarchs and patriarchs of the family. And so everyone there is like, it's relaxed, it's sort of timeless. It's really infused with joy, and the relationships are whole and going deeper. This is what we were designed to experience and to be, but it's like, it takes time to both build that up, to create the skill of actually cultivating an experience like that, so that you can begin to sink your roots. And imagine your children, like when Elijah came to his first Shabbat.
Elijah's our grandson.
Elijah, yeah. So he was like, what, maybe 4 weeks old?
Yeah.
And so at that Shabbat table, when Elijah came, we had 4 generations of our family, right? And so he was not just an individual. He was coming into something. And in many ways, I think about like what we've cultivated over the last 15, 20 years with this rhythm was for him, right? It's for us, it's for our parents, it's for our children. But ultimately, like, who's going to be the highest beneficiary of all the things that we've been learning in the skills? It's our grandchildren, it's our family line. It's those coming in that they're not, I think about, somebody being born, some child where there's not a sense of identity, or even in our culture where we almost say we don't want to give them identity, that it's somehow it's unhealthy to even provide all of this clarity about who you are, who we are, that you belong to this family. And so I think that's what this meal can do. If you create it, if you do this with skill and consistently, and we always encourage people to start very, very, very simple. But if you can do this, I don't think you can stop a multi-generational family from emerging from a practice that is this powerful.
Yeah. And we just got to experience this with you guys in this past Friday night. And it was cool because you had 4 generations there, and your dad talked about your grandfather and, the lineage there. And it was just a neat experience for us to be able to be a part of that, to be invited into that, and to see the way you guys are doing that. And then in addition, we sat right across the table from Kelsey. So we were hearing her firsthand. This is your 23-year-old who has baby Elijah. And we're hearing from her firsthand experience of being a part of this family as the firstborn, and all the iterations, and watching, her experience of it, which was just really beautiful. And it was exciting to hear from her, because you're seeing exactly what you talked about. We got to see firsthand the generational influence that's happening after 15 to 20 years of doing this. And so for those families that are listening, it's the first time, I think one thing that you talk about, Jeremy, that I just really encourage people to, this is something that's sustainable. Do what's sustainable. I've heard you talk about that. And when we started this, we're doing paper plates and Chick-fil-A. Like you said, like, keep it simple. Like, don't create something that's not doable. Create something that's sustainable. And April, I'd love to ask you, one of the things you did was you lit the candle on Shabbat, and then you explained why it's important for the mother to do that. Can you talk a little bit about your experience of Shabbat when you guys started it through the years, and what this has meant to you?
Yes, absolutely. So the practical side of things, starting simple is a really good idea. Understanding what is going on, that what we're talking about is not just something to like sprinkle on top of all these things you're already doing and you're so busy and all this stuff. We're really talking about kind of reordering your week to have Shabbat, or like a day of rest, or this meal as kind of the center. And then the days following that Shabbat, you get to reflect on it. And then in the days leading up to the next one, you get to plan for the next one. And so it kind of becomes this like center to your weekly rhythm. And so you can derive a lot of meaning from that. And if you have a bad one, a bad dinner, or things don't go well, or everyone was throwing a fit, or somebody got sick, or something like that, there's always the next week to try again, or to make iterations to improve it. And so when we were first starting out, I think one thing to think of is like, how can this be different from other meals? We want this to be different somehow. So maybe this is the one night a week you use a tablecloth, or maybe this is the one night a week you have a special drink for the kids. We wanted it to be really fun, so that for the kids, so that they wanted to do it, and so that they looked forward to it.
And they would remind us to do it.
And they would remind us to do it,
so
because we wanted them, when they were adults, to want to come home for Shabbat. And so making it fun and attractive to them all through the teen years and everything was important to us. But we did start out very simple. I think for me, it was like crock pot meals back then. Jeremy helps a lot in the kitchen now, but there were many years where that was not the case. And so I had to figure out how to do something that wouldn't be overwhelming to me. And we lived way out in the country and didn't have pizza delivery. Otherwise, that's probably what we would have done. But I think I did crock pot meals, and we did get special plates. But some weeks that would turn into paper plates. And we did sparkling grape juice for the kids, and that was a really fun thing. And then what you were mentioning about the candle is, we observed this. This was kind of a tradition that we observed and adopted from some of our friends in Israel. But they start the evening off with lighting a candle. And I don't know all the things that means to them, but what it means to us is that Jesus is the light of the world, and it's only because of him and what he did on the cross for us that we can experience rest on this side of the cross. And so I like to say, so the mother typically lights the candle because the mom is the one who has the hardest time to stop working. Typically you're resting in your home, or a good portion of it. And so that's kind of like the mom's space a lot of times. And so for her to not notice the pile in the corner, or to ignore the mess that's throwing on the kitchen counter or whatever, it can be really hard. So lighting the candle is like an intentional act that the mother's choosing to say, I will now trust in the Lord for what he's already done, and believe that it is finished on the cross. And I'm going to rest and allow what God has already done to wash over me for 24 hours, and just believe that my righteousness is as filthy rags, and he can make up for me not functioning at 100% for 24 hours.
Yeah, it's so good. And when you said that, I hadn't heard it put in that way. And so it was just so helpful for me to hear, especially from Christy's standpoint, like why it's important for her to rest, and that reminder of her being the one to light the candles. And so I would love, you guys are, I don't want to get into too many tools because I don't want to overwhelm our listeners on tools. Go check out Family Teams, check out Family Teams podcast, check out Family Revision. Jeremy, I'd love to, because I've been a disciple of Family Teams. I have been I've tried to be an evangelist, but it's hard for me to put into words and get people to, and I literally just before this, before we jumped on this podcast episode, have a friend who finally it clicked. And it's like, and I've been on him, I've been planting seeds for such a long time. And all of a sudden it's just like something switched when he read Family Revision, and he's bought in, he's hook, line, and sinker. And we're having this conversation. And I was so excited because I finally was able to have this conversation with another dad who's not a part of Integrated, but with somebody in my own local world. And there's, you talked about, there's a paradigm shift, there's a mindset, and then there's the tools. And I think the mindset is the thing a lot of us have to get out of, because we are so culturally caught up in the Western world and thinking about family. And you use an analogy, which I think is so helpful for dads. And that was you taking Jackson to the football field and seeing dads. Can you describe that epiphany for you?
Yeah. So when Jackson, our son, was 7, he had a buddy who was going out for football, and we were like, oh man, do we want to get into this? And so, but we were like, yeah, we had a lot of time that season. We were real hunkered down in the country, like April described. So we decided to go out for football. And of course, you always hear people kind of, tongue in cheek, kind of make fun of the fact that, dads and or men in particular have a hard time with kids. Oftentimes it's the mom who wants to have more kids or wants to have kids, and the dad could take them or leave them or whatever. And so I definitely imbibe that idea that maybe, especially, real masculine men who aren't super nurturing, they don't really like vibe with kids very well. So we drove up to Jackson's first practice, right? And we got to the football sort of field, and I looked at his team. We're walking him over, for the first time. And I noticed that there were as many men as there were these little 7-year-old boys, on this practice field. And so I walk over, with Jackson. I just introduce him to the coach and say, hey, this is Jackson. By the way, he knows nothing about football. Like, he's never played. He doesn't understand anything. And all of a sudden, these 3 men, 3 dads, they sort of descend upon my son. And they spend the next couple of hours just training him in every tiny little detail, about how to, the stances and everything. And as I sort of stood back and watched this take place, I realized it's not that men don't connect with children. It's that so many men, they really are built to build teams or be a part of a team, to either be a coach or to be a contributing member of a team. But men love team, I think that's, and so they don't see family that way at all. Again, family's a nest. And so there's not a lot of men who think like, there's nothing I'd rather do than sit on a nest, but to lead a team or be a part of a winning team, or to, that's a totally different. And when I thought about Abraham, that's the closest thing I think to what we in modern world would have, that he would have resonated with. He was building a team. And we read in Genesis that he had, over 300 men he had trained in his household. Men love to do this. They love to train and build and set vision and understand, like, how are we leading this team forward? But because we don't put family at all in that category, family, that could be almost, there's nothing more different than family than team. We have to go out and find that elsewhere. We got to find that in sports. We got to find that in work. We got to find that someplace else. And so most men are abandoning their team, joining other teams, and they don't realize that they have a wife and children who are sitting at home waiting for the coach to show up and start to lead them, because we've never said that. And so there's sort of a thought experiment that occurred to me after watching this event. And that was, imagine if we passed a law that said that on Saturday, every man would have to bring his family to some sports, park or something, and would have to compete against another family, similar ages or whatever. And all the scores from that competition would be made public, on Monday morning, at the water cooler, or whatever. Okay. Imagine the amount of fathering that would suddenly erupt across the country.
Oh, wow.
And it's because men don't realize this is who they are. This is how Abraham would have thought. And this is why he was so excited and into having children and leading his family. And so that I don't want that law to be passed, but I would really like for men to begin to think that way about their family. And that's the tension I think we're really in.
Oh, and that is that framework, when you catch this, I think, and this is what's happened to me, is when you catch this, everything else becomes like, you're a successful businessman. Like you've had multiple businesses, and April, you as well. I mean, you guys, your family understands business. You guys have businesses, but those businesses are not your end all be all. They are a means to a different end. And that is building the kingdom through your family. And, even just in this conversation that I had with this very successful friend of mine, he's just saying, I've been chasing this and this, and, been chasing this business and chasing this thing because you need a vision,
Right.
But he's like, I've never had a vision that was bigger than this. Like, this is my, and he's got it. And I think that's the thing that I see so many, 98% of us who, and I'm throwing me into that. Like, we are all part of this cultural experiment, I think, of the Western world that is, as you described, failing miserably. And I think for us to be awakened out of it, this is the thing that has awakened me out of it. And I think, that's why I'm so passionate about it. And it's fun for me, especially for those of you listening to the podcast, you follow Christy and I for all these years. You hear us talk about emotions and connection in our marriage and all these things. And I think you've been hearing probably, hints of paradigm shifting conversation that we have, reimagining a family, that type of thing. And I love that we're getting to have this conversation, because you're getting insight into where this is all stemmed from, what this all specifically looks like, and where we just want to point all of you to, because this is why we're so passionate, is because I think I think this has the power to change a generation. And this is why this is so important. One thing I was going to ask you guys, I'd love to take our podcast family briefly into some of the conversation that we had this weekend, because there were some freeing things for us. The first thing that I think was really important that we walked into was, we noticed that your house was just, everything had a purpose. Everything, and everyone had a purpose. Every child had a purpose. We walked in, and there was a number of different things going on, and I don't want to confuse everything, because I don't want to overwhelm people in terms of what different types of activities you guys are doing and what the tools look like. But at the same time, there was a purpose to everything. Each person had a purpose. But even specifically the way that you've designed your house, like Sunday night was opened up for your church community to come over. That was one of the things. And everything has a purpose behind it. Everything is designed. Can you take us into that a little bit and help us understand a little bit about where that came from and why things are created the way that they are in your home?
Yeah. Well, you can imagine how different thinking about your family as a team versus a nest. Like, what would that look like from a housing perspective, right? A nest has a very particular need, which is, where it's really a nurturing and comforting kind of metaphor, which is great. I mean, we definitely want to be comfortable in our home. We want to recover. We want to enjoy that. But we really see, if we were to just try to describe the sort of the metaphor that we really resonate with when it comes to a house, we think of it as an outpost on the edge of really the front lines of the kingdom, right? So we want to see the values of the king fully inhabited and represented in the house, but we also want this to be a place that is advancing the kingdom. Like that one of the analogies that we've talked about is, in sort of a monarchy, you had basically you had the king, but there were these dukes that would have castles, right, on the frontiers of the kingdom. And so these castles would be protecting, the vulnerable. They would be advancing the interests of the king. When the king called the army together, it was really the oaths of the dukes, right? And their their families and their subjects that would come together. And so, I really think that the monarchy is a really critical way to think about. Even Abraham, it's interesting that his wife had a, her name Sarah means princess. There's a sort of a monarchical vision for the family. And another analogy for those who are Tolkien geeks, we love like the idea of Rivendell, right? Elrond, he had this house that was like the last homely house, Tolkien describes it, right on the edge of the wild, and so it would be the last place that you would leave when you were launching into the unknown, and be the first place you'd return to when you were tired and beat up and needed to rest. So all of those things are really that's the vision that we have for our house. And so, yeah, when you think about the actual house, it's important that the facility facilitates the things that you really believe are a part of that. And so you want to have, and this has been a really slow process of us just constantly asking, it's really, for me, it starts with vision, and I mean that in a really literal sense, like envisioning certain moments. Like I want to see, what do I want to see? I want to see my family all at one table. That would be really cool. I want to see them outside at one table and inside during the winter, because I have to, so how could we facilitate that? I want to see us like doing physical activities together. I want to see like lots of families come together and have lots of space to hang out and to kind of, I want to see music. Like where is that happening? Like where is there going to be just spontaneous music emerging from, like all of these, the kitchen. I want to see people like gathering around and making really good food and drinking good drink and talking and just feeling really free and comfortable while they're doing that. I want to see a family be able to like come in from out of town and just hang out in a very comfortable way and just kind of go in and out of what we're doing, where they can have their own, cohesive family, but then be close enough to be able to see everything and participate in whatever they feel like doing. That's kind of the vision for the duplex, right? Those are all things that we saw years and years ago. And we just slowly started to ask is, we were entering every year, like, is there an improvement we can make to the house to possibly like bring this picture into fruition? So that's kind of the picture I think we would.
Yeah. And I think stewardship is, a big part of this. And the Lord has taught us so much about how to steward what we have. Another Lord of the Rings reference, like there's the steward of Gondor. So, we're here on earth and we're stewarding what God has given us. It's all his, and he's given us these things and we're trying to steward them to the best of our ability. And we've learned a lot at just different stages of our life, and learning how to steward the annoying corner of the property, or the place where the cobwebs are growing fast, or the places where the wasps come. Like we need to pay attention to those things, and we're in a fallen world and we have to kind of beat back the chaos. And so there's a lot of, if we don't do that, like things just go to ruin. And so how do we not just beat back the chaos, but also bring life and purpose into each space? And so I would say we've gotten lots of different ideas from even just touring museums, or like mansions that people used to live in and now they're a museum, like famous people, rich people, just going in and seeing like the mistress of the household. This was her desk, and this is where she would plan the menu for the week, and she would give the orders to the chef, and she would those kinds of visions of like, oh, and then this was the ballroom where they had family dances, and where they would invite the whole city to come for their fall ball and things like that. It was just like, oh, these things gave us such like big, grand vision for like what we wanted. We want to be able to be a hub. We want to be able to be a place where there's life and fun and activity. And then we also, like on the spiritual front, we're like, we want our kids to go out and come back. We want them to go out into the hard things in life. We want them to face difficult challenges. And then we want them to know that there's a place to come to heal up, to debrief, to get fed, to all that stuff. And so that kind of adds the spiritual element to the outpost.
Yeah. And you guys lived exactly what you guys, like, we got to experience that firsthand. And that's the thing that I was telling my friend today about this is, reading Family Revision, this isn't just a theoretical book. This is something you guys have been living for so long. And we got to experience the fruit of that this weekend. And Jeremy, you just said it well. The duplex, the apartment, it's designed for a family to come and be their own family, but yet still come into your world without you interrupting your world in a way. And that's what happened. And it felt like we were in your world, and yet we were our own little family. There was zero pressure. And this is kind of the thing that I want to describe, or I want to invite people into now, because there's parts of this that can feel really overwhelming, especially when you have young kids. You guys are introverted, we're introverted, and we were asking you guys about this. Like, how have you made this an outpost? You have people over, and it's so fun because you got the pickleball court in the back, and it's like, people can just, and yet you guys are unashamedly admitting that there's times you'll just go to bed and people are still hanging out at your house. And there was this sense of like, we didn't feel pressure. Like, we weren't feeling pressure from you all to hang out all the time. And yet we hung out, and it was just effortless. And it was just and it was like this sense of like, like you can breathe and you want to be together, and yet you can still have your own family. This takes time to cultivate. Can you describe, help us enter into your world and understanding of that a little bit, in terms of who you guys are, how you learned who you are, and the ebbs and flows of allowing people in and out of your house and yet still being a place of respite?
Yeah, that's a good question. Well, I was describing to you, Josh, that people that have come over that are from the Middle East, they'll oftentimes say, "Oh, this feels very, very Middle Eastern," and this is why I'm so grateful to have spent a lot of time over there, because there is a radical difference in terms of the way we think about hospitality in the West. So when people come over, we feel hyper responsible for their emotions. For basically, we're responsible for everything they're feeling, everything that they're doing, and so we have to be dialed in. And so we have to have the energy for that level of connection every minute they're in our house. And so we're entertaining, right? And so that hyper responsibility just burns out people. So unless you're very extroverted, you tend to say, maybe I have the energy to entertain people maybe once a month or once a quarter. We host major gatherings at our house at least 4 times a week, oftentimes more than that. And we're very introverted. And so the other vision, besides like entertaining, and some kind of hyper controlled,
making sure everything's perfect.
Yes.
And clean.
It's really more that house itself. Your job as a mother and father is to craft an environment in which relationships happen, but you're not responsible. Your values are there. You've raised your children in a certain way. Like, there's things that you've done, and you've been strategic about how you've set it up so it is comfortable. But beyond that, you have to release that responsibility and just craft the environment, and then let things organically move, and breathe. And let the extroverts extrovert and the introverts introvert, and like let people's energy ebb and flow, and have lots of these environments. I know one of the visions that I was really into that helped me, just because sometimes it's just like you're dialing into, like, you get kind of in a rut. And so like I thought about like the 4 elements, for example, earth, fire, water, and wind. And so I think about even in our house, we have places for each of those things. We have a large garden that you can get your hands dirty, and the kids are out there playing all the time. And then we've got we have probably 4 fire pits in different places. And so fire to me is a huge way to relax. Like, if I'm around a fire, I'm relaxed. And so sometimes in an evening, it's like, 8, 9 o'clock, people are still hanging out. I'm not going to like feel, okay, I have to stay here, like just face to face and try to keep this conversation going after 2 hours and I'm exhausted, my brain's starting to melt. I'm going to go build a fire, air. That's kind of like what I think about pickleball. I love that, like just being kind of, getting winded, and then we have that little pool thing. So yeah, there's just like to have different environments where different things are happening, where you're having different experiences, and then you're just cultivating that. And again, it really is a long-term. All the things I'm describing didn't exist in this house when we first bought it, and certainly this is our 7th house, and hardly any of these existed in our previous houses. But like, this was a vision we had, that kind of grew over time, and then we embraced this definition of hospitality, really, that we saw in more ancient cultures that felt so much more healthy, because you can do it way more frequently. And I think that we kind of abdicate all of this to third places in our culture, like the church, the coffee shop, which is great. I love those places, the bar. But I really think those are supposed to be the house. When it says an elder is supposed to practice hospitality in the Bible, and that sort of trajectory for the men or the fathers in the church is to aspire to that position. And we're told and commanded, all of us, to practice hospitality. it's not talking about, opening your house once a month or, an elaborate dinner party or something. It's really talking about crafting an environment in which, people are comfortable and that you're opening your doors frequently. And that requires, for those of us who are introverts, to think about this differently. And for us, for sure.
I would say a big part of it too is us learning how to set a tone. And so, like kind of being in charge of the tone, but not being in control of every single moment that happened when people came over was a real skill to learn. Like, because you don't know how other people's kids are going to behave in your house, even though you don't let your kids jump on the couch. Maybe someone's going to come over and let their kids jump on the couch. So how do you, set the tone or whatever? So that has been a skill, and it doesn't, work perfectly every time, but just the generality of learning how to, so for years for us, that was training our own children in these things. Like,
yeah,
I see you're jumping on the couch again.
Yeah.
In our house, we don't jump on the couch.
Yeah.
The couch is for sitting or whatever.
Yeah.
And so, training our own children for years, even in just like how to clear the table and how to clean up the kitchen after a meal, those are things that we now we like kind of trained our church community in. Hey, these are the things that we need done in order for us to feel like we're not hosting every week. These are just ways for us to welcome you into the facility of our house. And so it won't feel like we're just always doing all the work. And so that was for me, I can tend to be more on the controlling side of things. So I had to learn how to let go of a lot of that. And so they put the dishes back in the wrong cupboard after they washed them, like not a big deal. And so being able to give up some of those things that felt like hard for me at first.
Yeah. I'm sure we did that this past weekend. I'm sure there's some dishes in the wrong place.
It's okay. I got it. I covered it.
Guys, I just want to thank you so much for your time, obviously this weekend, the way you guys opened up your home to us, but then also just coming on right afterwards and just sharing with us a little bit of your world. This is probably one of my most exciting podcasts to get out there, because I want all of our podcast family to learn about you guys, to know about you guys. And we've had you on before, but I think it's new for me because it's different for me, because I have, since the last time we had you on, caught the vision in a whole new way. And God has just molding and shaping me in a whole new way that just has me on fire for it and invigorated my heart for this vision. And so it's an honor, getting to have you guys on. So thank you for taking time with us today.
Awesome. Thanks for asking us.
Yeah. And thank you so much for bringing your family down. It was so fun to see you and Christy and the kids. So yeah, thank you so much.
Yeah, it was great to meet all of you.
Yeah, we're so grateful. Check out the show notes, family teams. We'll put integrated in there. We'll put family revision in there. And Jeremy's also working on a new book, which I'm ready for it to be done so I can read it. And we'll have him back on. We'll have these guys back on again in the future, as well as we continue to live this out in our own journey. So until next week, keep in mind that the greatest red carpet you will walk is through your front door.